Hello everybody, welcome back to Star Wars Discovered. Today, the question for the video are what are the differences between lightsaber combat and the Force in the originals and the prequels? And if you don't exactly know what I mean, I'm going to show you these two clips. You can clearly see a difference. So, what is the difference? Well, first you have to consider the fast pace and the drama and the general excitement. If you look at Obi-Wan vs. Darth Vader in Star Wars: A New Hope, it is very slow paced and not as flashy as the battles of the prequels. And this is maybe because Star Wars was a fairly new franchise in 1977 and George Lucas didn't have enough time to make his own form of combat, and he relied on the samurai as those were his heavy influences for lightsaber combat. And for the prequels, he wanted the Jedi to have their own style of fighting. He wanted it to be flashy. He wanted it to look very nice because he thinks if a Jedi Order has stayed up this long, then it must be very powerful in its style of fighting. But we could also just mark this up as different technology from 1999 than 1977. Now, in the originals, even though we didn't know what forms of lightsaber combat were, we saw forms 3 and 5 in Star Wars, mostly just 5, with Luke and Vader both specializing in Form 5. However, Vader had a little Form 3, and he really mixed all forms together. However, in the New Hope vs. Obi-Wan's fight with Darth Vader, we didn't see much of anything. It doesn't look like there was any form going on there. It looks almost like two Jedi who were using Form 1, which is a blaster bolt, trying to do lightsaber combat. It was very slow, not much excitement was happening, but that's because George Lucas really didn't value the lightsaber combat as much as he did in the later movies. Then, in The Empire Strikes Back, when Luke faces Vader, you get a little more excitement of Form 5 and seeing how it works, and seeing the aggressiveness and the power that it brings. And then Return of the Jedi, when Luke faces Vader the second time, there's more use of the Force, which is a more logical battle because the Force is what balances the Jedi and the Sith, and it is heavily reliant in lightsaber battles. Now, it's obvious that tons of Force effects could not be seen in the 70s and 80s because that was non-existent. George Lucas didn't care how much it cost, he wanted to get it done, but he couldn't make that happen. But Vader throwing boxes at Luke was cool enough, and it really showed us that the Force is more than just lifting things and pulling and pushing. It is very complex. On the other side, the prequels are way better when it comes to special effects, excitement, and the Force and combat. And no, this isn't George Lucas just trying to show his special effects. This is George Lucas finding a way to put cool special effects and enhance the story to make it better. Because Star Wars is about themes and certain events that are relatable to people, so lightsaber combat was part of that. And with the general excitement, we see the lightsaber combat and the fast pace, with Anakin and Obi-Wan in Revenge of the Sith obviously being the best battle overall for the viewer's satisfaction with the things that I just mentioned about the Force powers. And that was a Form 3 and 4 or 5 fight, and it was very fluent considering one person was aggressing and one person was on defense. So it looked very good with Anakin attacking. It looked very matched his new powers, and George Lucas really showed how aggressive he was, and he showed how concentrated Obi-Wan was. The second thing I want to talk about in this video is how George Lucas could have made the originals and the prequels more similar when it comes to Force and lightsaber combat. Obi-Wan and Luke don't use Form 1 in A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, and I find Form 1 to be very beneficial. Luke could have used Form 1 in Empire Strikes Back when he was being shot at by Boba Fett in Cloud City. Now, if you're thinking that Luke could have used Form 1 in New Hope when he was inside the Death Star, that'd be impossible. He barely deflected a laser bolt that a training droid a few minutes before shot him twice, and he barely got that. It wasn't until Return of the Jedi when George Lucas thought outside the box when it came to the lightsabers and the Force. And in New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, Lucas probably concentrated on who won or lost the duel, not about special forms of attack and special forms of defense in that time. And that was probably because of how there were no special effects back then. And even though there were some, George Lucas had used them all and was planning to use them all. But in Return of the Jedi, when more years passed by, he started adding elements like the Force and more flashy combats. Luke was more powerful and confident in his abilities due to his training with Yoda. Form 2 isn't also introduced until Attack of the Clones. Some Force-sensitive characters, such as Count Dooku and Ki-Adi-Mundi, use Form 2. Form 2 is used for careful and controlled strikes and is pretty beneficial to the person using it. But I can think of ways that Lucas could have used Form 2 in the originals. You see, I think the Inquisitors are a great idea, and I'm pretty sure that Lucas could have thought of Inquisitors for the originals. It's pretty simple. Jedi Hunters would be very useful for Darth Vader. They find Obi-Wan and other Jedi and kill them while Vader takes care of other things, such as the Death Star. Inquisitors have all kind of cool lightsabers. I know the Grand Inquisitor dies in Rebels.
There are some things far more frightening than death.
But what if he escaped? What if he survived? With the Grand Inquisitor in the originals, it would be a solution to the Form 2 problem, since he was proficient with Form 2. If Lucas came up with the Inquisitor idea before Disney got a hold of Star Wars, there would have been a Grand Inquisitor in the originals. Pretty cool. Moving on to other forms, Jedi don't usually use Form 4, except for Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, and this is because it leaves their torso exposed. And this is why, after Qui-Gon Jinn died, Obi-Wan switched to Form 3 Surisu to not basically die. But Form 6 or 7 would have been useful to any Force-sensitive character in the originals, which circles back to my Inquisitor idea. Lucas didn't think of Form 6 until the prequels, which is being physical during combat. For example, kicking, jumping, ducking, and pushing. I know that the Inquisitors normally use Form 2, but what if Lucas could have made it so that you use Form 4, 6, or even 7? Now that would have been cooler. Now, the third thing that I wanted to mention was the things that Lucas came up with after he made the originals. We already know that he came up with 4 out of the 7 lightsaber techniques in the prequels. What about other things? Well, Lucas also created Qui-Gon Jinn, Jedi, who was in fact Obi-Wan's master. In the originals, Obi-Wan's Force Ghost very clearly said that Yoda trained him. Maybe Obi-Wan meant that Yoda looked over him and taught him some things as he was a youngling, and then he was passed on to Qui-Gon, or something like that, as many younglings did learn from Yoda in the prequels. Or maybe Force-sensitive ghosts have long-term memory ghosts, but that's unlikely. Or Lucas just did not think of that line when he was making the prequels and did not think that it would be important. Another thing that George Lucas came up in the prequels that he did not mention in the originals was Force speed. In Star Wars The Phantom Menace, when Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon were on the Trade Federation command ship waiting for the Viceroy to arrive, they were attacked by battle droids sent by the Viceroy. The two Jedi cut through them, like butter. Then the droidicas, aka destroyers, attacked. The Jedi knew that they were no match, and they used Force speed to get the heck out of there. And after that, no character in Star Wars has used Force speed. A 10 Jedi could have survived. If you want to find out how many Jedi could have survived the prequels if they used Force speed, watch a video coming up soon, all the Jedi that could have survived the prequels using Force speed. It will be out next Wednesday. Now, if you're thinking, maybe only really powerful Jedi and Sith can use it, you'd be wrong. Obi-Wan was only an apprentice when he used Force speed. Not only that, he had a very low midichlorian count, and he had to work almost 3 times harder than any other Jedi in the temple. You can't really call an apprentice, especially one with a low midichlorian count, a very powerful Jedi, because he's not a Jedi yet. Yes, he is an unusually talented Padawan for sure, but just not that powerful in the Phantom Menace. Also, the Jedi breathing devices that they use while underwater. I understand that Luke had no reason to swim in the originals. Also, his home planet was a giant desert, with water so scarce. There was such thing as moisture farmers, but there was one place where Luke could have used a breathing device that was introduced in the prequels, in Empire Strikes Back. Luke spent half the movie on Dagobah, a swamp planet. Yoda was making Luke do drills and training. One of them could have been Luke being underwater in the swamp with a breathing device on in case he had to do that in real life. Not as much as a Force training, but a more life-realistic scenario. Of course, Luke wouldn't have brought that with him because he had no idea that was a thing. but Yoda sure had one on his ship when he arrived. He needed one in case the Empire went searching for him. He could just stay underwater undetected while the Empire snooped around nearby. One other thing that Lucas came up with in the prequels, but did not mention once in the Star Wars originals, was the age requirement to become a Jedi. Most younglings start training at 4, however they were taken into the Jedi Order as infants, as we saw in the Clone Wars when Plo Koon found Ahsoka. Anakin started at age 9, and the Council said he was too old. Luke was literally 20 years old at Empire Strikes Back. Yoda did say he is too old when he was talking to Obi-Wan through the Force.
He is too old.
However, they still trained him, even though Anakin was heavily debated on his future, even though he was just 9 years old.
No, he will not be trained.
No. He is too old.
Maybe the old Jedi of the originals who survived were very soft on rules or the Jedi Code because of how long it's been without a Jedi Order. I'm not sure. And Luke only had a small amount of training that the younglings in the prequels had. And still Luke turned out to be a great Jedi, possibly because he was a Skywalker. However, Lucas was not very reliant on lightsaber fights till the prequels because he liked making movies on relatable themes that everybody would connect to. It wasn't until the last throne room scene where Luke realized how lightsabers are a dangerous weapon, and they are a last resort. He learned to trust in the Force, which is something no one really did until Qui-Gon from the prequels. Make sure to subscribe to this channel to learn more about Star Wars content.